the members of the group were primed and ready for this doomsday, to occur inevitably. And so it was strange that, according to David Thibodeau, right, the one of the surviving victims, he said that obviously, basically, what he told, this is so crazy because Thibodeau claimed that he had been convinced by David, right, that he was up shingling a roof of the larger house when David Koresh looked at him and said, Thibodeau, what are you going to do 6 months from now when there are tanks running up and down the Double E Ranch Road? And he looked at him and said, David, I don't care what your message is. This is America. They're never going to bring tanks on this property.
Yeah,
He
it's crazy.
reportedly did the same thing with Kathy Schroeder, another member, when he looked at her and he said, Kathy, what are you going to do when helicopters are buzzing this building? She responded, David, there's never going to be helicopters on this property. I
I,
just think, like,
in response to that, I was curious. I was thinking about this while you were saying that. Those people, do you think those people, those survivors, those two survivors in particular, are still supportive of Koresh and that idea of what he was building?
Thibodeau is. I know
So,
David Thibodeau is for sure,
so you
at
could
least
say then,
from
like, those survivors want to like maintain some image of him being like this real like Messiah, right, or a prophet. Whereas I think you mentioned earlier that there were almost like, I guess, a schism within the Davidians, and there's other Davidians who don't agree with Koresh. I wonder if you even know like what they say about things like that with,
oh
you know,
man.
what his
Are you trying
prophecies.
to get into the Wizard Wars, Shane? Is that what you're trying to get
If
into
there
here?
are wizard wars, I would like very much to get into those. Yes.
It's such a crazy story what happened with George Roden, who was like the original, the son of uh, basically the woman who seemingly groomed Koresh in a
Yep.
way, or
Mm.
Koresh was.
Like what?
It's a
Something like
strange
40
dynamic.
years plus older or some shit? Something
Like
crazy.
70.
Yeah.
That's
He's in his
right.
early
Yeah, that's
30s
crazy.
or
That's a
late
crazy
20s.
story.
Yeah,
Tell us about
but
that.
you have a lot of the older members though.
Mm.
They're claiming that when, as I had mentioned earlier, I kind of alluded to the fact that they had really said he didn't share these kind of charismatic characteristics or traits that he seemingly developed after his pilgrimage. But they were saying that when Vernon Howe first came to Mount Carmel in '81, he didn't appear to even be that bright. He had previously been a carpenter, which falls perfectly into obviously the Jesus
Mm-hmm.
narrative,
Right.
right? And was good at fixing things, but also had a stutter and lacked social skills, and was definitely not expected to possess leadership qualities in any way. And so after this pilgrimage to Israel, he returned claiming to have been shown a new, deeper knowledge of the scripture, granting him the understanding and ability to interpret and teach the seven seals. But it's strange because again, it's like you have these, you have these original members who they very much believe, like as far as the schism that occurred, and I believe the Branch Davidians originated in 1955, and it was from the shepherd's rod, or the rod of the or the yeah, or the rod. So it was the shepherd's rod or the rod, I
Mm-hmm.
think is how it's referred to.
Okay.
And but the Davidians is how they basically became this offshoot of the worldwide Seventh Day Adventist Church. But apparently, according to even Thibodeau himself, one of the surviving victims, he's like, we did never refer to ourselves as Branch Davidians. Like, I only discovered that term. It was introduced to me on the media
Oh,
whenever
funny.
the coverage was happening of the actual siege.
Hmm.
And so yeah, you have this interesting component of like how the Davidians were founded in 1929 by this individual named Victor Hotef, who was the president and prophet, but he was allegedly excommunicated from the Seventh Day Adventists for promoting a heretical doctrine. And so you have this report from the Christian Research Institute, and this group was headquartered at a property known as Mount Carmel Center near Waco, and they claim that text as far as like it had reached its peak as far as membership around the 1950s, right? Early 1950s. But this is when it began to splinter into various factions after Hotef's death in 55. So this is interesting because there's a core ideology that that's in regard to its foundation. And the Davidians' belief system was this prophecy of an imminent apocalypse involving the second coming of Jesus Christ and the defeat of the evil armies of Babylon. And so the center itself was named Mount Carmel after a mountain in Israel mentioned in Joshua 19:26 in the Old Testament. So none of it is by accident as far as how it kind of formed. But by 59, you have Victor's widow, Florence Hotef, and she announced that the expected Armageddon was about to take place. But after the failure of this prophecy, control of Mount Carmel Center would fall to Benjamin Roden, the founder of the Branch Davidian Seventh day Adventist Association, known as Branch Davidians. So he was the one who would originally promote a slightly different doctrinal belief than those of the original Davidian organization. But it was when his death occurred that Lois Roden, his wife and widow, took control of the center, and so that's where things begin to kind of you get the introduction of Vernon Wayne Howe
Mm-hmm.
and her son, Lois Roden's son, George Roden, who was considered, to be the original prophet as far as he was supposed to assume the position of prophet. But instead, she decided she would groom another young man by the name of Vernon Howe to be her successor, and that is, of course, David Koresh. But Vernon chose the name David in order to include himself in the lineage, linking him directly to the biblical King David, as Jose had mentioned, from who the new Savior would descend. But this is also connected to the throne of David, which Jesus obviously would occupy after he returned in Armageddon and the rapture.
Mm.
But so apparently the last name Koresh has kind of blew me away because it's kind of like this esoteric connection to the Kabbalah. There's always some sort of weird spiritual context and that's playing out that seems to be a part of this underlying narrative that most people really don't at least aren't overexposed enough to even be able to kind of acknowledge it and conceptualize it. But it's strange because Koresh itself, there's an extensive backstory apparently, and Koresh was chosen because it is the biblical name of Cyrus the Great for his first heavenly insight. Vernon was reminded of Cyrus, king of Persia, mentioned prominently in Isaiah 45. Babylon conquered Israel in 586 BC and took many Jews into captivity. But when Cyrus and his Persian army defeated the Babylonians 47 years later, they freed the Jews, returned them to their homeland, and with the Persian king's own money, rebuilt the temple there. Cyrus is described in Isaiah as a Messiah of God, meaning one appointed by the Lord to provide a special service. Several messiahs are mentioned in the Bible, but Cyrus is the only Gentile so designated. So Vernon Howe was informed that he was this name. He was the same, or he was the same Cyrus. So he was a reincarnation, right? It's very much a part of the OTS framework as well, kind of the secret society aspect of how these reconstructed prophets continue to reemerge on this
Scientology as well.
generational timeline. Yeah, truly. It really is. But the Order of the Solar Temple played deeply into this, as far as like
I think
Joseph
Kabbalah
Lemambro.
believes in reincarnation too, but I might be wrong on that one. But go on.
I'm not sure.
It's fascinating stuff, but to understand that obviously, Cyrus, whose name in Hebrew is Peresh, right? It makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So Vernon, he took this as his name, and like his biblical namesake, David Koresh his role as a prophet would be to rescue the righteous from Babylon.
Right. And he called the government Babylon, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah. And he would consistently claim that, they would be, the Davidians themselves would be used as the example, right? As far as the modern Babylon would play out, the war would play out. It would come to them, essentially, is what he consistently would tell the Davidians in the group. And so they were very much primed and ready for this to take place. It was just a matter of time.
Well, before we move on, I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't ask you to tell the story I heard you tell about a grave robbing story on the Davidian compound. Am I right? Didn't that happen with the older
That's the Wizard Wars?
right? Okay, that's
it is the craziest
so what?
story.
Yeah, what happened there?
So yeah, you have obviously you have this individual named George Roden, who once discovering this individual, like you pull him up and honestly, it's kind of strange just as far as the way this plays out because allegedly there was a lot of like cooking methamphetamine on the property at a certain point that was happening at George Roden's house. So it's
As
kind
one
of
does.
interesting that because he originally was the owner of the property,
Hmm.
but George Roden obviously was the successor to his mother Lois Roden, who had become president of the Davidians in '78.
Right.
But that was just directly after Benjamin Roden had died, his father, her husband. But it's interesting because George felt that his position of leadership was threatened and deeply offended by David Koresh's relationship with his mother because obviously, I mean, come on, he's having sex with a 70-plus-year-old woman and
Yeah.
he's I believe 28 at the time, if I
Talk about
remember
the burden
correctly.
of sex.
Yeah, exactly. It's very strange how
Terrible.
this kind of played out to begin with. And again, it seemed like some sort of now maybe he was strategically positioning himself to hopefully potentially gain access to the property.
Hmm.
That's possible,
Right.
but yeah, it could have just also been that he was essentially groomed by this woman in a way, which is very possible in many ways. And so, but still, he files a lawsuit in federal court, this George Roden, and he alleges that Koresh had raped Lois and brainwashed her into turning against him. So that's what he claimed that Koresh did to his own mother.
Wow.
And so in '84 or '85, there's a fire at Mount Carmel, the administration building, and it destroyed $500,000 of apparently of their property and of but again, this is the administration building at the at Mount Carmel, and so Roden claimed that Koresh was the one who started this fire, but Koresh was already claiming that the judgment of God was playing out, which is kind of hilarious. So he says that no man set this fire, and that Roden, claiming to have the support of the majority of the cult, forced Koresh and his group off the property at gunpoint. So obviously, a further splinter as far as the
A little
you had
bit.
what was that?
I said a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But this individual, Charles Joseph Pace, moved out of Mount Carmel Center and set up home in Gadsden, Alabama. So you're already having individuals kind of splinter off from the group whenever this was happening. And so Koresh, he takes about 25 followers and settles in Palestine, Texas. Roden renames Mount Carmel Rodenville. And in a videotaped interview, Roden led a tour of Rodenville using an M1 carbine as a pointer and declared it's basically a holy jihad.
Oh man.
Khomeini versus Israel. That's what Vernon Howell has with me.
Whoa.
It's such
Epic.
a crazy story.
Epic.
So, uh, Roden, apparently resentful of Koresh's power over the Branch Davidians, had challenged Koresh, saying that whoever could resurrect the dead was the true leader. So this happens when, in October of 1987, he decides to dig up a corpse that was buried on the Branch Davidian property and claim that he's going to, you know, resurrect this corpse,
Oh my
and that
god.
if whoever is, the true prophet will be able to win this challenge. And so it's so crazy, man. Roden told the press that he had exhumed this body only because he had been moving the community cemetery. So that was his claim.
Yeah.
But while Roden prayed over the body of Anna Hughes, who had apparently died 2 decades earlier, Koresh reported George Roden to the McLennan County Sheriff's Office for corpse abuse. So that alone was kind of like a hilarious strategic play by Koresh himself,
Seriously.
who gets presented with this challenge and then just calls up the authorities and it's like, "Hey, man, this guy's abusing
This
corpses.
false prophet
Go
and this
check that
corpse
out."
abuse. Oh my goodness.
So the police, they tell Koresh at the time that he needs evidence to back up these allegations, or there's nothing they can really do. They can't like
Wow.
just go onto his property and force their way into any of his. But so this is when you have this strange story play out to its kind of climax, where November 3rd, '87, Koresh and seven followers return to Mount Carmel, heavily armed and wearing camouflage. They stealthily entered the compound, allegedly to obtain a photograph. However, they did not bring a camera, but carried weapon and a map of the grounds with positions to occupy. They found Roden crouched behind a tree with an Uzi submachine gun, and a gun battle ensued for several minutes.
Wow.
Roden flees the property with wounds to his hand and chest. Koresh's companions were found not guilty after a 2-week trial for attempted murder in Waco, and a mistrial was declared in Koresh's case.
Dude, that's insane. That is
So
Isn't
bizarre.
that
insane.
crazy?
That's
I mean,
dumbass.
my
Insane.
God, Koresh inevitably gains access to the property, because he decides that he's going to pay the back taxes for the property and treat it as his own, and so he inevitably just takes control,
Isn't
Wow.
which was
Roden
really a
isn't
great play.
Roden the same guy that had a meth lab set up there too or something? So that was the
Yeah,
precedent they used later in order to
yeah.
essentially make it like a joint task force type operation, I believe.
That's how
So
they got
yeah,
the military, right? That's how they got the
all the bells and whistles, all the
access
nice
to the
Bradley
military. Yeah,
vehicles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
to the MVs. Yeah, yeah, exactly. To the Bradleys and the CS
Wow.
gas as well. It was their justification was that this was an active drug nexus, and they could prove that they were cooking methamphetamines that
Nice.
on
So
the
yeah,
property.
so that gives
Yeah.
them
Transport.
more credence to kind of do a smash and grab type deal because it's like, oh, they could flush the drugs. It's like,
When in
okay,
Right.
yeah,
reality, the
yeah.
story goes, the report was that once Koresh and the Davidians gained control of the property and moved back, that they essentially cleaned out Roden's old meth lab, and had really just kind of like redesignated it for the group to like run weapons and the militia network at the time, which they were very much a part of the just like they would consistently go to gun shows and try and make some money for the group itself by selling weapons in a legal manner. I mean, they even owned a gun shop. I believe one of the members of the Davidians owned a gun shop, which the feds tried to actually
Yeah, they had
went
a
to and were
FFL
trying to
dealer, I
question.
believe, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And while they're questioning him, he calls up Koresh and tells him, "Hey, dude, the feds are here. They're what do you want me to tell him?" And he's like, "Give him the phone. Let me talk to him." And so, yeah, he gives him the phone, and the federal agents just straight up just start. They were once they obviously discovered that it was David, they just dragged their feet and hung up on him essentially. So they had a goal, and that objective was going to be achieved. And I believe that that was much more than just honestly a justification as far as like some sort of press opportunity. I think it's far more than that. That is a convenient, as far as just a convenient misconception that I think has been manufactured to really throw off public perception as far
Mhm.
as their ability to kind of wade through the actual disturbing details that lead to a far more, yeah, really it is. Honestly, it becomes an extraordinary, like paradigm shifting just as far as the your ability to try and make sense of this in any sort of right honest objective way.